Some games entertain you, some games challenge you, and then there are a rare few that make you forget you're even playing a game at all. Instead, you exist in their world. You breathe their air, and when you finally leave, it feels less like finishing a story and more like waking up from a life you've lived. Kingdom Come Deliverance isn't just a medieval RPG. It's a time machine, a world that doesn't care for you, doesn't bend to your will, and refuses to acknowledge you as some chosen hero. It's indifferent, brutal, and alive. And yet, it is precisely because of that indifference that it becomes so immersive, because survival in this world isn't given, it's earned. And that's what makes Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 such an incredible sequel. It expands on everything that made the first game special, while refining its rough edges, delivering an RPG experience that is more immersive, more brutal, and more rewarding than ever before. This isn't just a continuation of Henry's story, this is a culmination of everything Warhorse Studios set out to create.
I am Sir Marquard von Aulitz. I come in the name of Sigismund of Luxembourg, King of Hungary and Croatia.
Who are you?
Henry. From Skalitz.
From Skalitz. Aren't you that boy who ran away from us?
You're right.
Sure. It's all right, it's all right.
I remember everyone I killed.
Why did you do it to me, Father?
Don't you?
Hurry, Henry!
Will I ever see you again?
You don't need us anymore.
War is a nasty business.
Warhorse wasn't some industry giant backed by a mountain of publisher money. It was a small, independent team formed in 2011 by a group of developers who had one clear goal: to make a historically authentic medieval RPG. Not a fantasy world with knights and elves, not a Hollywood version of the Middle Ages, but a real medieval world. One that followed actual history, real-life combat mechanics, and period-accurate societal structures. Leading the charge was Daniel Vavra, a name that might ring a bell for fans of classic RPGs. Vavra was one of the minds behind Mafia: The City of Lost Heaven, a game praised for its gritty realism and uncompromising storytelling. He had a vision for Kingdom Come Deliverance, an RPG where realism wasn't just a gimmick, but the foundation of the entire experience. No magic, no dragons, no over-the-top heroics, just a blacksmith's son trying to survive in a world that didn't care about him. But as is often the case with bold ideas, publishers wanted nothing to do with it. It was too risky, too niche, too expensive to be made without some kind of a fantasy twist. Because let's be honest, when was the last time you saw a medieval RPG without magic? With traditional funding shut down, Warhorse turned to the one group that believed in their vision: the players. In 2014, they launched a Kickstarter campaign with a modest goal: £300,000. The response was overwhelming. Over 35,000 backers pledged more than £1.1 million, making it one of the most successful Kickstarter campaigns for a video game at that time. But making Kingdom Come Deliverance was a technical nightmare. The team had to build a massive open world with deep RPG mechanics, realistic physics-based combat, and AI-driven NPC routines, all on CryEngine, a notoriously difficult engine to work with. They had to create a combat system that mimicked real-life sword fighting, write an open-ended narrative that allowed for player choice. And because of their commitment to historical accuracy, they couldn't take shortcuts. Everything had to be researched, cross-checked, and then painstakingly recreated in-game. To make things even harder, the team was working with a fraction of the budget of other open-world RPGs. While games like The Witcher 3 had teams of hundreds and millions in funding, Warhorse was a small studio, making a game that, by all logic, shouldn't have been possible. And yet, against all odds, they pulled it off. When Kingdom Come Deliverance finally launched in 2018, it was clear that Warhorse had succeeded, but not without massive scars. The game was massive, beautiful, and immersive, but it was also riddled with bugs, performance issues, and jank. NPCs would randomly float, quests would break, and the physics engine sometimes had a mind of its own. It was rough, so much so that many critics couldn't look past its flaws. But for those who did, for those who stuck with it, who pushed through the technical hiccups and saw the world for what it was meant to be, there was nothing else like it. It was one of the most authentic and engrossing RPGs ever made. And over time, as patches rolled out and improvements were made, more and more players came to appreciate the sheer brilliance of what Warhorse had built. Now, years later, we stand at the edge of another chapter. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is here, and with it, the final stage of Henry's journey. But before we dive into that, let's go back to where it all began. Not with a prophecy, not with a hero's calling, but with a simple blacksmith's son and a world that refused to make things easy for him. Set during the bloody chaos of the Hussite Wars, Kingdom Come Deliverance drops you into the heart of medieval Europe, a world of shifting allegiances, political turmoil, and everyday struggles that feel lived in rather than scripted. This isn't a world crafted to serve you. It existed long before you arrive, and will continue whether you rise to meet its challenges or crumble beneath them. Henry's story begins the way so many great stories do, with the end of everything he's ever known. A blacksmith's son, content with an easy life of running errands and drinking with friends. Henry is not a warrior. He's never swung a sword in battle, never plotted revenge, never questioned the stability of his quiet, simple world. But when war reaches his doorstep, when his village is reduced to ash, and the people he loves are cut down before his eyes, his life is shattered. Not in some grand cinematic you are the chosen one moment, but in a cold, merciless way that feels terrifyingly real. His home is gone, his parents are dead, and now with nothing but a rusted blade and his own will to survive, he is forced to navigate a world that neither knows nor cares who he is. What makes Henry's journey so compelling is that it never loses sight of this. He doesn't wake up the next morning as some master swordsman. He doesn't have divine guidance or supernatural abilities. He's just a man trying to survive, caught in a war he did not start, bound by obligations he did not choose. And that's where Kingdom Come does something no other RPG quite dares to do. It forces you to earn every single step of his transformation. The first Kingdom Come Deliverance already delivered one of the most immersive medieval worlds in gaming. The vast landscapes, towering castles, and muddy peasant villages felt real in a way few games ever manage. But Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, it surpasses that in almost every way. This isn't just a bigger world, it's a better one, where every town, every forest, every winding path feels carefully crafted, overflowing with detail and passion. Take Trotsky and Kuttenberg, two of the standout locations in the sequel. Trotsky's towering castle ruins dominate the skyline, while Kuttenberg stands as a bustling hub of commerce and power. This city feels dense, alive, used. People push past each other in the street, merchants yell over one another to sell their wares, beggars plead for scraps, while nobles barely acknowledge their existence. Every location feels like it has a history, like people lived there long before you arrived, and will continue long after you leave. Even outside of scripted moments, the world finds ways to tell stories. You'll stumble upon an abandoned camp, the embers of the fire still smoldering. Who was here? What happened to them? You'll come across a corpse on the roadside, an arrow still lodged in its chest. Was this a robbery gone wrong? Every corner of this world has a story to tell, and it's up to you to listen. Whether you're hunting in the early morning mist or hiding from enemies in the dead of night, the wilderness is as breathtaking as it is dangerous. The way the light filters through the trees, the distant sounds of birds and rustling leaves, it's easy to get lost. And I don't just mean directionally. You can lose hours just riding through the countryside, taking it all in, feeling like you've stepped into a time long past. A beautiful world means nothing without the people who make it feel alive. And this is where Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 elevates itself to a whole new level. NPCs don't just exist, they live. They wake up at specific times, go to work, take breaks, visit the tavern, play dice, return home, and sleep. You'll see farmers tending to crops, monks deep in prayer, and blacksmiths hammer away at metal. But what makes it truly remarkable is that this isn't just scripted behavior. It's a living, breathing simulation of real life, creating a world that feels organic, unpredictable, and immersive in a way few games ever achieve. Before writing this script, I decided to test the system myself by following a merchant. And you can do this with any NPC. I watched as he walked home at night, ate dinner, took off his clothes, placed them in a chest, and went to sleep beside his wife in pajamas. Then, after sleeping for 8 hours, he woke up, ate breakfast, dressed for the day, and only then did he leave for work. And only at that time was I able to trade with him. That level of detail, realism, and commitment to immersion completely blew me away. Of course, we've seen NPC schedules before, from The Witcher 3 to Red Dead Redemption 2, but so many games fumble the execution. Either the schedules are too rigid, or they're too shallow to actually impact gameplay, but KCD2 nails it. People react to you in ways that matter. If you walk into a noble's banquet dressed in dirty rags, don't expect to be taken seriously. If you threaten someone while wearing fine clothes with no visible weapon, they'll laugh in your face. Your appearance, reputation, and actions all matter in every interaction. This isn't just aesthetic detail, it's gameplay. Before going into a major conversation, you have to ask yourself, how do I want to be perceived? Should I dress like a noble to gain favor, or wear my battle-worn armor to intimidate? Every interaction forces you to think, and that's what makes role-playing in KCD 2 feel so natural.
Hey, did you forget your clothes somewhere?
At your mother's place, when I was shagging her.
My word!
You're not just picking dialogue options, you're living Henry's journey, making decisions that feel like they genuinely shape the world around you. Medieval RPGs almost always lean on fantasy, magic, monsters, and ancient prophecies. And while those stories can be great, KCD proves that history itself is just as compelling. The conflicts here aren't about world-ending threats. They're about real people, real politics, and the brutal realities of medieval life. The world's brutality isn't just about combat. Class divides are real obstacles, and navigating them is part of the experience. Religion is woven into everyday life, shaping conversations, decisions, and social order. And when battle does come, it's not a stylized, choreographed duel. It's a mess of clashing steel, exhaustion, and desperation. No magic sword is going to save you. Only skill, preparation, and wit will. By stripping away fantasy, Kingdom Come forces you to engage with real history, not as a backdrop, but as something you're living through. And that makes it far more immersive than any game filled with dragons ever could. When I completed KCD 1, I felt the story couldn't get any better. It had a solid cast of characters who interacted with each other like normal humans would. Hanush, Sir Radzig, Capon, Godwin, Sir Divish. All of them were very well-written characters that made the world feel alive. The first game suffered from a slow and mundane pace during the first half of the story, but once Henry had entered the monastery, the story had picked up significantly. That mission is still my favorite in the entire series. And of course, KCD 1 hit us with two massive twists, Istvan Toth being the traitor from the very start, playing everyone like a chess master, and then the shocking revelation that Sir Radzig was Henry's father all along. These weren't just surprising, they redefined Henry's journey, adding layers to his identity, motivation, and personal conflict. So going into KCD 2, I thought to myself, there's no way they can pull off anything like that again. I was sorely mistaken. Before we dive into those twists, let's talk about the characters, because KCD 2 does something truly special with its cast. In KCD 1, Henry was the only character who truly mattered, and while there were many great side characters, the one who came closest to being a secondary protagonist was Sir Hans Capon. But let's be honest, Capon was a massive pain in the ass when we first met him. He was a spoiled, entitled brat who didn't understand the world at all, constantly making Henry's life more difficult. But as you got to know him, you started to see the cracks in that facade. Capon wasn't just another arrogant noble. Deep down, he was a good man. Someone who, if given the chance, would sacrifice himself for the greater good, show kindness to peasants, and prove that nobility didn't have to mean cruelty. His character development was one of the best in the game, and by the time KCD 2 rolled around, his relationship with Henry had transformed into something more than just a noble ordering a commoner around. For me, Henry and Capon's brotherhood felt even more meaningful than Henry's relationship with Samuel. Their bond felt natural, earned, and tested through hardship. Warhorse even lets you romance Capon. While I personally didn't go down that route and see them as brothers, the fact that the player gets to decide makes the game feel even more personal. Capon also remains one of the funniest characters in the series, bringing much-needed levity to an otherwise serious story. Father Godwin, on the other hand, is easily my favorite priest in any video game or media. In KCD 1, he was a wild card, a booze-loving, charismatic priest who was more than willing to bend the rules, but still had a deep sense of morality and responsibility. One of the most memorable moments in KCD 1 was drinking with him all night, then giving a sermon in his place the next morning. But in KCD 2, Warhorse takes his character even further. This time we actually get to play as him, stepping into his shoes as he returns home to confront his past. His arc, where he resolves his differences with his father and proves that he's not just a drunk, but also a brilliant diplomat, a fierce swordsman, and a man of conviction, felt like the perfect evolution of his character. Through it all, Godwin remains one of Henry's most loyal allies, standing by him when it matters most. While Godwin, Capon, and Henry take center stage for most of the game, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sir Radzig and Hanush were being sidelined. In KCD 1, they were massive figures in Henry's life, mentors who shaped his worldview and gave him a purpose. But in KCD 2, they have even less screen time, which felt like a missed opportunity. That being said, when they do appear, their presence is undeniable, and I couldn't help but feel that Henry and Capon are slowly becoming them. The way their roles evolved, how their personalities complement one another, and the way they carry themselves. It all felt like they were walking the same path as Radix and Hanush once did. Everything changed when the attack on Nabokov forced Henry and his allies to flee the region. Up until this point, I thought the game's scope was contained, but suddenly, the world expanded beyond what I expected. When I realized we were heading to Kuttenberg, I was completely shocked. This was a city that had been talked about for so long, but actually seeing it in the game for the first time felt surreal. What I didn't expect was the cast of new characters that would join Henry's journey. At first, I didn't like a single one of them. The Devil's Pack felt like a group of reckless drunkards who loved fighting and causing chaos for no reason. Kuyenka's introduction mission dragged, and I just wanted him to shut up. But as time went on, I realized how wrong I was. Each of them had unique personalities that slowly revealed themselves. Kuyenka wasn't just a loudmouth. The Dry Devil was unpredictable and violent, but his chaos had its purpose. Adder, a Polish warrior, barely spoke at first, but in one of the game's most tragic moments, he revealed he could speak English just before his death. That moment hit harder than I expected, because by then, these weren't just NPCs, they were Henry's brothers in arms. Janosch, the group's cook, provided moments of warmth, and Ziska, who had been a strong presence early on, took on more of a commander's role as the game progressed. By the time the game ended, the Devil's Pack weren't just mercenaries, they were Henry's family, sticking by him no matter what. Even Samuel, who wasn't Henry's brother by blood, formed an incredible bond with him throughout the game. Some of the most intense, action-packed missions involved the two of them working together, especially during the Jewish quarter attack by Eric, which turned into an absolute bloodbath. The sheer amount of adrenaline you feel in those sequences is unmatched. And in the final mission, when Henry and Samuel sneak out of the fortress to find the army, their teamwork solidifies their bond even further. But what makes KCD2 feel even more immersive was that the supporting cast actually felt alive. Catherine, Rosa, and Muzo weren't just there to serve Henry's story. They had their own ambitions, struggles, and paths that existed beyond Henry's influence. They weren't just NPCs to interact with, they felt like people who had continued to live their lives even after the game ended. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 didn't just tell a great story, it built one of the most believable, engaging casts of characters I've ever seen in an RPG. Every relationship felt earned, every arc felt natural, and every character brought something unique to Henry's journey. Whether it was Capon's growth, Godwin's redemption, the loyalty of the Devil's Pack, or the sacrifices made along the way, the world of KCD2 felt more alive than ever before. The side quests in KCD2 didn't feel like typical side quests. They felt like essential parts of the world, adding layers of depth to the people and places Henry interacts with. In the first half of the game, while in Trotsky, I didn't even touch the main quest at first. Instead, I dedicated myself to completing every possible side quest and task, and what stood out immediately was how well written and well acted they are. Every interaction felt like it mattered, like it had the potential to connect back to the main story later on. One of the best moments that reinforced this feeling was the wedding at Essamine, a rare instance in RPGs where a seemingly small quest felt alive and personal. Every character I had helped earlier in the game was there, interacting with me, acknowledging my past choices, making it one of the most memorable moments in the entire game. But unfortunately, in the Kuttenberg region, this kind of payoff was missing. While there was one standout mission, where Henry could unite the Master Swordsman and the Devil's Pack to help retrieve a knight's body from Sigismund's camp, it felt like a rare exception. That moment was fantastic, seeing the different characters I had helped come together under a single banner for a mission, but I had hoped there would be more instances like this. I wanted to see every ally I had made throughout the journey come together for a bigger purpose. Maybe it's a bit cliche, but some sort of interaction or post-war reunion with the many people Henry encountered would have been the cherry on top, cementing the impact of Henry's actions across the world. But even without that, KCD2 kept me on edge the entire time, because its main story never gave me a moment to breathe. The moral complexity of the war was always present, forcing me to question my allegiance constantly. One thing I always questioned while replaying KCD1 was why were we fighting so hard to help Wenceslas, a king who drinks, whores, and seemingly doesn't even care about ruling? That question is still ever present in KCD2, as Sigismund, despite being ruthless, had a strong military mind and was willing to do what was necessary to take control. He was still the villain, especially after bringing the Cumans into the land and allowing them to ravage Skalitz. But in KCD2, they do something brilliant. It shows both sides of the war. This becomes especially apparent when Henry finally gets the chance to speak with Serato, a character who at first seems reasonable, logical, and even charismatic. He challenges Henry's beliefs, forcing him to think critically about why he supports Wenceslas and what makes him more deserving than Sigismund. The game never forces an answer on you. It simply presents the complexities of power, loyalty, and leadership, and lets the player wrestle with their own conclusions. The moral uncertainty only deepens when Henry and Capon go to Nebukov. It was at this point that everything started to click. The game takes a sudden 180-degree turn, and the people Henry had been hunting down and fighting against were suddenly not who I thought they were. And just when I thought I had a clear understanding of the situation, the game would throw another unexpected twist at me, keeping me on edge, always questioning what would happen next. But what really cemented the moral dilemma was when Henry went undercover in Sigismund's camp with Catherine. In this mission, Henry is forced into a difficult side quest, raiding a village as an undercover Prague soldier, taking food and valuables from innocent people. If you take everything, the villagers will starve and die. If you refuse, you can't complete the mission. I sat there, staring at the screen, not knowing what to do. I ended up giving away my own food and groschen because I couldn't bring myself to let them suffer. These types of moral dilemmas don't appear often in RPGs, at least not to this level of weight and consequence. And that wasn't even the most gut-wrenching moment. Henry's undercover mission with the Prague soldiers wasn't just about survival. It was about betrayal, deception, and emotional weight. His task was to track down the murderer of the Cuman commander, Cheston, and steal the finger of God. But spending so much time in their camp, interacting with the soldiers, getting to know them, made everything feel personal. Kratz and Musa weren't evil men. They were just soldiers fighting for their side, just like Henry. They treated Henry like a friend. They trusted him, and yet I knew at some point I would have to betray them. The moment finally came, and I had to fight and kill Kratz. And instead of feeling victorious, I felt hollow. This was one of those moments where KCD2 truly excelled, forcing you to question your own role in the war.
There. It's done.
What's the matter? Aren't you happy?
It just doesn't seem right. What we did to those people.
Not people, the enemy. Remember that.
And the cycle of betrayal and survival didn't stop there. Just when I thought I could finally rest after a difficult battle, something would go horribly wrong. And when Henry managed to steal all the Italian silver from Sigismund, I thought it was finally time to breathe. Then out of nowhere, Eric attacks, forcing me into a desperate fight against a massive horde of soldiers. Somehow, just in time, Henry manages to escape. And just when I thought this was the final challenge, KCD2 hit me with the biggest betrayal of all. Robert had been working against Henry the entire time. The moment he revealed his true intentions, killed Adder, and turned everything upside down, again, I sat there stunned. Everything in the story built toward one of the most epic final battle sequences I've ever played. As Godwin, Capon, and the Devil's Pack prepared to defend the castle from Prague forces, it was clear that this was the endgame. The battle was intense, brutal, and filled with desperation. Henry and Samuel had to sneak away to gather reinforcements, while everyone else held the line. It was a moment where every decision that I had made, every ally that I had helped, every lesson that I had learned, all culminated in this one climactic battle. And when Henry finally returned with the army, charging into battle one last time, it felt earned, satisfying, and truly epic.
It stinks like a festering wound here.
It's time to heal that wound, once and for all.
That is why we're here, isn't it, youngster?
Let's not waste time.
Henry had done it. Istvan was dead. Markvart von Aulutz was dead. Sigismund's forces had fallen. But at what cost? The war had been won, but the losses along the way were devastating. And then, Henry's parents appear before him. Depending on the choices you made throughout the game, they're either proud of him or deeply disappointed. After everything Henry had been through, every battle, every hardship, and every sacrifice, the game asks a simple question. Was it all worth it?
What happens now?
Now we'll get on with life. Do you remember what I told you? That there are some things in the world worth living for. Blue skies, warm sunshine, green grass underneath your feet, beautiful girls,
Good wine, good people, and a fine steed underneath your backside, yeah.
Enjoy it while you can. I can assure you nothing lasts forever. And if you're missing that excitement now, which I'm sure you are, you can be certain that it'll find us again itself one day. I believe there are interesting times still ahead of us.
If there was one thing that divided players in the first Kingdom Come Deliverance, it was the combat. Some loved its realism, its weight, its brutality. Others found it frustrating, unpolished, and outright unplayable. The truth? It was both. The combat was ambitious, but often janky, so much so that it turned players away in the first few hours. But in KCD 2, it takes everything that made the original's combat unique and refines it into something truly special. The sequel keeps the core of the original system intact. The 5-directional swordplay, the stamina-based exchanges, the importance of timing and positioning, but now it feels sharper, smoother, and more intuitive. Enemies no longer feel like they're spazzing out when they attack, movement is less clunky, dodging and parrying feel responsive, and once you learn the system, it clicks into place like a perfectly executed riposte. At its core, Kingdom Come's combat system is not about button mashing. It's about control, patience, and technique. You can't just swing wildly and hope to win. Every move must be deliberate. Every block, every feint, every strike must be planned. If you get careless, a single well-placed counter can end you in seconds. And that's exactly what makes it feel so damn good when you start mastering it. The 5-directional attack system remains, but enemy AI is leagues ahead of what it was in the first game. In KCD1, getting outnumbered meant almost certain death, not because of realism, but because the AI would just swarm you and break the system. Now, the AI fights smarter, not just harder. Instead of 5 enemies attacking you at once, they circle you, they bait you, they force you to engage on their terms. It feels like an actual medieval battle rather than a game AI just throwing numbers at you. And then there are weapons. There's more variety than ever. Pole axes for reach, axes for sheer stopping power, long swords for balance, shields for defense, and even firearms. Yes, guns. Primitive, but deadly. Capable of piercing plate armor when used correctly. But just like everything in Kingdom Come, these weapons are tools, and every tool has its time and place. A crossbow might be great for a stealth kill from a distance, but its reload time means you won't get a second shot in combat. A poleaxe can keep enemies at bay, but in tight corridors, it's nearly useless. Choosing the right weapon isn't just a preference, it's strategy. The parry system in KCD 2 has been massively improved. In the first game, the window for perfect parries felt inconsistent. Sometimes it worked like magic. Other times it left you wide open even when you swore you timed it right. Now, when you parry, you know exactly why it worked or why it failed. It's precise. And when you execute a master strike, a perfectly timed counter that flows directly into a riposte, it feels incredible. But parrying is just the beginning. Combos are back, and they are far more useful this time around. Instead of being some obscure sequence that only hardcore players use, combos now feel like a natural extension of your skill set. Learning them is optional, but if you take the time to train the masters across the land, you'll unlock devastating techniques that make combat feel fluid and satisfying. And the best part? The game never forces you to play a certain way. You want to be a duelist, relying on precision and ripostes? You can. Want to be a brute, using axes and overwhelming force? You can. The combat is challenging, but fair. And most importantly, it lets you define your own style. Armor plays a huge role in this. In most RPGs, heavy armor just means taking less damage. But in KCD 2, it changes how you fight. Wear full plate and you're nearly impervious to slashes, but you're slower, heavier, and easier to exhaust. A lightly armored opponent might not have your defense, but they can outmaneuver you, dodge your strikes, and land precise attacks where your armor is weakest. And this is where your weapon matters. A sword will struggle against plate armor, but a warhammer? A well-placed strike will crush bones inside the steel. Suddenly, combat just isn't about skill, it's about preparation, gear, and knowing your enemy. One of the biggest additions to KCD 2 is early firearms, and they are absolutely not overpowered. In fact, they are slow, clunky, and unreliable, which is exactly what makes them feel so realistic. A well-placed shot can kill an armored opponent instantly, but reloading takes an eternity. They're not meant to be your primary weapon. They're a tactical tool, something you use at the right moment to turn the tide of battle. And the way the game balances them is genius. You can't just run around gunning people down. If you rely on firearms alone, you'll find yourself out of options very quickly. They're powerful, but situational. Stealth in the first game was functional but clunky. Sneaking was useful, but often frustrating, with AI that felt either too dumb or unrealistically aware. In KCD 2, stealth is vastly improved, sound travels realistically, and guards behave more naturally. If you want to be a thief or an assassin, The game actually supports that playstyle in meaningful ways. Longbows and crossbows now feel better than ever, rewarding patience and precision. And the best part? The AI remembers you. Kill a guard in one town, and rumors may spread to the next. You're not a ghost. You're a man with a reputation, and your choices carry weight. For all its brilliance, Kingdom Come Deliverance has never been known as a perfectly polished experience. The first game launched with its fair share of jank. Floating NPCs, horses teleporting into the sky, quests breaking in ways that make you question the fabric of reality itself. It was ambitious. It was immersive, but it was also a mess at times. So naturally, the big question that comes with KCD 2 is, did Warhorse finally get it right? Is this the refined, technically solid version of the vision they set out to create? Well, yes and no. One thing is undeniable. This game is absolutely stunning. Whether you're riding through the golden fields of Kuttenberg at sunset, or sneaking through the muddy streets of a war-torn village in the dead of night, every frame of KCD 2 feels like a painting brought to life. The improvements in lighting, texture detail, and environmental depth make this one of the most visually believable medieval worlds ever created. Cities and villages feel used, with withered stone, wooden beams darkened by years of exposure, and streets that actually look like people walk through them every day. The character models are a huge step up. The first game had its fair share of awkward faces and stiff animations, but here, faces look more expressive, armor has weight, and every detail, from dirt stains to battle scars, tells a story. Now here's where things get a little trickier. Performance is better than the first game, but if you're expecting a completely smooth experience, you might need to temper your expectations. On high-end PCs, the game runs well, but not flawlessly. Expect frame drops in dense cities, occasional stutters, and moments where the game struggles to keep up with its ambition. On consoles, performance is solid, but not locked at 60 FPS. Some dips in heavy combat sequences or large-scale battles are noticeable, but nothing game-breaking. Load times are much improved, making fast travel and entering new areas far less of a hassle compared to the first game. Overall, it's a massive step up from KCD 1 at launch. But with a world this detailed, this intricate, and this full of NPC interactions, some performance issues are still expected. Thankfully, none of them are game-ruining, and Warhorse has already shown that they're committed to patching and optimizing where needed. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the jank. Is it gone? No. Is it better? Absolutely. But let's be real. KCD 2 still has its moments where you stop and go, yeah, that probably wasn't supposed to happen. NPCs can still get stuck in weird loops, sometimes standing on tables, sometimes endlessly sweeping the same patch of dirt. Horses, while improved, still have their moments of supernatural behavior, sometimes deciding that gravity is optional. Guards can be inconsistent in their responses. One minute, they'll let you off with a warning. The next, they're chasing you down like you just committed high treason for bumping into them. The difference is that none of these are as game-breaking as in the first game. These bugs are mostly funny rather than frustrating. And importantly, major quest-breaking glitches are far less frequent. So yes, you will see some jank, but compared to KCD 1, it's night and day. If the visuals pull you in, the sound design keeps you there. The world of KCD 2 sounds alive. When you walk through the countryside, you hear birds chirping, the distant rustling of leaves, the faint chatter of travelers on the road. Inside a village, you catch the echo of blacksmiths hammering metal, merchants calling out prices, and tavern goers laughing over a game of dice. It's not just ambient sound, it's a living, breathing world. And then there's the combat audio. Every sword clash, every grunt of exhaustion, every crack of a poleaxe against armor sounds so visceral. When you land a perfect counter, you feel it, not just in the mechanics, but in the impact of the sound. The music? Gorgeous. The orchestral score blends booming medieval battle hymns with soft, melancholic village tunes, shifting dynamically depending on your actions. Whether you're riding peacefully through the countryside or locked in a desperate duel, the music knows exactly how to make the moment hit harder. So where does Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 stand in terms of technical execution? It's not perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than the first game. The visuals are stunning, the performance is improved, the combat and NPC animations are more fluid, and while there's still some jank, it's manageable jank. The kind that doesn't ruin the experience, but occasionally makes you laugh. If you're coming into KCD 2 expecting a AAA polished on the level of Rockstar or Naughty Dog, you might be disappointed. But if you're here for a deep, immersive RPG, one that puts systems and world building first, then you'll find that, even with its rough edges. KCD 2 is one of the most authentic and rewarding RPG experiences ever made. Some games entertain, some games are challenging, and then there are a rare few that pull you into their world so deeply that when they finally end, you don't just put down the controller. You sit there, staring at the screen, feeling like you've left behind a piece of yourself. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is one of those games. It doesn't just tell you a story, it makes you live it. It doesn't just create a world, it makes you fight for your place in it. Every swing of your sword, every choice you make, every scar you carry feels like it belongs to you. Because this is not a world crafted for your convenience. It is indifferent, it is brutal, and it is breathtakingly real. And yet, despite that indifference, or perhaps because of it, it becomes something unforgettable. When the final battle is won, when the dust settles and the echoes of steel and war cries fade, there is no grand cinematic closure, no divine prophecy fulfilled, no chosen hero standing triumphant. There is just Henry, a man shaped by struggle, by loss, by the weight of history, a man who, like you, fought for every step he took. And as the credits roll, you realize that this was never just Henry's story, it was yours.